Well, you're probably wondering how I'm going to hook all this together. I used a website called Raspberry Pi Tutorials to just sort of learn how this is going to be wired and also to get this schematic. I'm using a Raspberry Pi as my main processing unit, and then the LED strip, which you can see in the diagram. You notice that there are wires that come off of it in the diagram, and they wire into the Raspberry Pi, allowing the Raspberry Pi to run the lights. I will put a link to that original article down below.
Thought you might be interested in how I'm hooking this all together, in case you want to do it yourself. First up, I'm using a power supply. It's a AC to DC adapter, and it's 10 amp, 5 volt. And that has just a connection that goes into here. I got this off Amazon. I think it actually may have even come with the strip of lights that I purchased. And then the strip of lights will come off of here. This is just a little connector that came with them and makes it kind of easy to connect and disconnect. And it has on the lights the version that I use, which is the WS2812 LED strip. That's a specification for LED strips. There's several others, but this one works for the color switching that I want to do, and it's easiest to wire that I found. There's a 3 version and there's a 4 version wiring scheme. This is the 3 version. It's definitely simpler. You don't get the depth of color resolution out of it that you will from the 4 version, the 4 wire version, but it's definitely easier to wire. So you notice there's a little indicator. There's the negative and the positive. The negative comes out and straight onto the wire here. That's along the side of the light strip. And there's also a small lead that leads off to the card, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there is the positive doesn't go to the Raspberry Pi card. It just goes straight to the other side of the wire, the LED strip. And you'll notice that there's a green wire in the middle, and that goes to the center of the LED strip of this WS2812 LED strip. And that is the data line. And the computer card is able to speak to each individual processor on the LED strip and turn them on and off and check the color and the brightness and everything. So that is all through this one data line, which is the center. Now, the negative tap that comes off and the data line go to this card, and this is, again, a Raspberry Pi. I'm using just the very first version of the Raspberry Pi. I've got some others, but I had this one sitting around and it's starting to get a little older, but it drives these LEDs really well. So, still very viable. It's always been like a little workhorse for me too. I've never had it burn up or anything get too hot. So I recommend the very first version, and it's cheap. You can probably pick one up for $10 or so on eBay. The negative goes to this strip of pins. I'll try and get a little closer here. And it is on the 3rd pin. So you think the outside and to the right here from the way the picture is showing here, it's on the 3rd pin is the negative, and the data pin is the 6th pin. So there's 2 open pins, then the negative, then 2 more open pins, and the data pin. So that's how that all fits together. Very simple to just solder up a little bit. You don't even really have to solder it, but I wanted my connections nice. And what I'll do is I will mount this vertically inside the jukebox. There's a couple of holes that you can you can screw a screw into, and I'll make sure that there's some spacing behind it. So I'll put a couple of spacers, and I'll have it just exposed. I could put this inside a card. I have some cases for this, but what I found is that they don't allow as good of airflow. And so I want as much airflow, especially in there because there's some old components that really radiate some heat out. So I'll have this kind of as far away from those components as I can, and pretty much wide open so that the air just flows across it as good as possible. And I should also tell you that on this version there is not Wi-Fi. So to go in and program it, I have to run a little cable, RJ45 networking cable into here. And then I just connect to it remotely. So I don't have to have a keyboard or a screen or anything connected to this. I just use SSH to program it, if you're familiar with programming. So I'll show that in a little bit later, how to do that. You could also connect in a USB mouse and keyboard right in here, and then a monitor into the port here, just a HDMI port. Well, my camera came out on that last little bit, but what I'll do is I'll show in the next section how I'm going to program this. I'll connect up and show you the code for it and how you can do it yourself.